Love. Some would say it took a backseat when the pandemic forced us apart. As a family-run and proudly Canadian-owned company, Charm Diamond Centers saw the need to bring us together with tales of love and created the Canadian Love Map podcast. Since then, we've shared hundreds of real, uplifting stories that prove love conquers all. So thank you for listening. We couldn't do it without you. And remember, love starts here. What the world needs now is love. More love.
Stars literally aligned.
He's always been the one.
There's someone out there for everyone.
I'm Nancy Regan, your host on the Canadian Love Map. We are on a journey to uncover and share love stories of all kinds.
He's never forgotten to bring me flowers.
We're hoping we're going to give a little good news to this world.
Even in these dark times, the life continues to go on.
It's all about compassion, devotion, adventure, and of course, love.
Everybody needs somebody. Everybody needs love.
This is the Canadian Love Map.
Well, love is the most important thing.
I was walking with a young cook who's a recovering fine dining cook, and he got to listen to a call that I was on with the province, and the food policy for school food will be announced in an hour and 20 minutes. And he said, wouldn't we be able to scale to do more of that? And I said, I don't think there's enough people to come and do this work with us. And he stopped me dead and said, what are you talking about? People want to be involved in this. They want to love what they do. They want to be in service to this. They are here. You need to know that. I am so moved by it. I'm like, okay, I guess we're doing 256 schools. It's just going to take us a couple of years. Like, we'll figure it out. And love is the centering design point of all of it. I know that's what's going to make it work.
Today's love story belongs to Mark Brand of Vancouver. Mark is a chef, DJ, and social entrepreneur who, after forging a terrifically successful commercial career, had a vision to help unhoused and food-insecure Canadians in a way that's sustainable and realistic. Mark and his foundation have provided millions of meals with an innovative token program and fueled by his love of cooking and his love. Mark can be seen giving TED Talks and spreading his message across the globe. And now he joins us on the Canadian Love Map. Mark Brand, welcome to the studio. I love that you're starting off by taking a photo of the producers out there through the window.
If you don't document it, did it even happen?
No one's done that before. Thank you for, it says a lot about a person when they're focusing on the people behind the scenes.
Nothing happens without them.
Right on.
The integral portion of, I think we spend too much time walking in and going to goal versus setting what's the energetic all the way around us. So it's great to spend time with the folks here this morning and learn about them. And the space is beautiful.
It's pretty nice, isn't it?
It's
I didn't
really
build
nice.
it, so I can feel pretty open saying, isn't it wonderful?
It's so great. So for folks at home who can't see where we are, this is a purpose-built podcast studio in the heart of Halifax, and one of the most important streets in Halifax that you wouldn't know from the street front, and it is stellar. So I'm really honored to be here.
Yahoo! So Mark, I don't know where to start with you. First of all, I feel almost embarrassed to say you only came on my radar recently. I started to research you and just went into this deep dive. Because I tell people right now, I only want to do things that have to do with community, connection, or contribution. And you are hitting those three out of the park in everything you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think there's it's interesting to hear. We spent so much time focusing on being on the radar, right? So when we started the work that we do in social impact, and we'll contextualize it in a bit, but in, let's say 2009, we were so deeply involved in the public relations aspect of humanizing the aspects of homelessness and the need for food and nutrition and everything that that falls under the banner of what we do with food, that I spent 4 to 5 years, from reality TV shows to constant appearances to constant media stuff, that I lost touch of what I did or what I cared about.
You were so in the marketing.
100%. So I started saying no wholeheartedly to about 95% of things that came our way media-wise, not as a point of like, I'm standing away from this, but as my time needs to be spent in operations. So not only do I not I actually feel like that's great that you didn't know about me a little bit, you know,
Oh.
because we've been so busy with the work. I find the other side of it. I'm like, good, I'm doing my job, because my head's been way more down in the last decade than it's been up.
I always say when people apologize to me for not recognizing me, I always say, no, I actually love that.
The mystique is what you're going for.
But I
Nancy.
can't help, I have a bit of a word fetish, and I can't help but think that part of your life lesson has to do from going from marketing brand to mark brand,
There you go.
making a mark.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, the story's long. I grew up across like 6 blocks towards the ferry that way on the other side of the water here. And what you intend to do in the world and what you think is possible in the world and versus what becomes is very, very different. And I think, I get to work with a lot of local entrepreneurs here, and I'm thinking of Alfred Bergeson just down the road at Tribe, who I've been.
Love him.
We love Alfred a lot. And his lens on possibility is, you're sitting on a stage with Baron Davis a few days ago talking tech, and what we are told we are able to do, and the tall poppy syndrome that's so insidious, particularly in the colonial spaces, right? So anywhere that England invaded, the tall poppy, the analogy is any poppy that grows above gets its head chopped off.
Mm-hmm.
And
No
so-
good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly right. And so being able to widen the aperture and think about, 17-year-old me was a dishwasher 2 blocks away and wasn't sure how I was going to pay my rent and had no idea what was coming next and was very scared. And, 48-year-old, almost 49-year-old me sits here thinking about the thousands of meals that we're putting into schools and to community today. And I would have had no concept of that, like none whatsoever. So I think life doesn't happen to you, but in part your path is chosen. And so if you're wise enough to not take yourself too seriously and work extremely hard in the things you care about, you find yourself in the flow of, let's call it for analogous reasons, a river, right? Where you can find yourself, instead of swimming against it, really allowing it to flow in a general direction, which leads us here today.
If you haven't listened to the song The River by Coco Love Alcorn,
Okay.
after that you need to.
Heads up.
She's a past guest, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's about learning to go with the flow. I would like to take the river backwards, and you said you grew up on the other side of the harbor in Dartmouth. Take me back to when you were a kid over there.
Sure.
And who were you? What were you like? And what was going on in your life?
I think what I'm called to talk about more is never having a grounding. So I was born in Scotland and moved to Tunisia at 1 year old, and moved to London at 2 years old, and moved to Calgary at 4 years old, and then moved to Nova Scotia at 9. So my mom is from here, and my family on her side's from here, and they're still here.
But you didn't have a chance to grow roots in any of those places.
No.
I
So
suppose.
what does that encourage as a behavior? And that is, to want to be liked more than anything in the world, like to want to be liked. So it encourages a whole bunch of bad behaviors that go along with that. How can I be noticed? How can I be accepted? What makes me stand out from other kids? And I was very emotionally challenged by the world around me, young. And so I would get very upset very quickly at, injustice is too strong a word, but at things that would trigger young me. And I mean 9, 10, 11 years old, I can reach back and find really core memories that are of those things or injustices, or getting in physical fistfights in defense of somebody who may have a developmental delay or something along those lines that felt all encompassing and overwhelming to me, right? When you would see something along those lines happen. So young me in Dartmouth, I was doing some work with the East Coast Credit Union yesterday, who I love, and they're helping with one of our programs. And I was at a youth leadership summit doing a Q&A with them yesterday. And they said, so you're from Dartmouth, amazing. What school did you go to? And I said, all of them. They said,
Oh, there's a story there.
what do you mean? And I was like, well, I started at Woodlawn Elementary, and then I went to Prince Arthur, and I got kicked out of Prince Arthur, so I went to St. Peter's, and I managed to get out of St. Peter's to Dartmouth High, and I got kicked out of Dartmouth High. And somebody in the audience stopped me and was like, nobody gets kicked out of Dartmouth High. And I was like, I think my picture's still on the wall there somewhere.
It's a high bar.
Yeah, and I think the anger in me as a kid is where I'm getting to with this. So I always had this sense of, I could feel the underlying racism within our cities, like consistently. My friend groups were deeply multicultural, predominantly African, Nova Scotian. And I wanted, and I believed that there was so much more in the world. My dad got transferred to Nigeria when I was 14. So I'm at Dartmouth High, and he gets transferred to Warri, specifically in Nigeria. And he gets there and essentially says, you're not coming over here. To which I said, I can't wait. Right. So I spent 3 years off and on in Warri, Port Harcourt, and Lagos. And I share that because it really informed who I was as a person, which was even more detached from societal reality, because I had seen the most violent, the most insane, the most oppressive, and integrated myself into that because of the skill set of moving consistently with Nigerian people, and spent a lot of time understanding culturally, having a great time, eating some of the best food I've ever eaten, being introduced to music that I never thought was possible. Like, who knew Nigerian jazz and funk was a thing? 14-year-old me did not. And so it informed a lot.
Did you find a sense of belonging that you were so desperate for there?
Absolutely not. So there's generational racism and trauma that they have had to endure as a folk. So externally, yes. Could I be accepted and hang out and spend time? Absolutely. But when we cut a layer deeper, no. So you're in this interesting position that I never actually felt like the things that I cared about, or the people who I could see were living in full integrity, couldn't be fully accepted into those spaces. And I wasn't smart enough to know that. I just knew I felt slightly uncomfortable, like I couldn't fully land. And so it informed me going forward into what I knew was, if I couldn't find myself directly in a community, then I would build one of my own. And right, if there's no table for you to sit at, you build your own table.
At what age did you come to that very mature conclusion, consciously or subconsciously?
I mean, very consciously by about 16 or 17, which is a lot of us who ran together in high school and externally had either absentee parents for no fault of their own, who were working to make things make sense, a lot of military brats, a lot of folks working overseas, a lot of single parent homes. And we banded together and created, our own little gang. And that was who we spent our time with and who raised us. And, we even got some time in the paper, and gang, the family is doing X, Y, or Z. But we found ourselves sort of galvanizing around things. And then terrible habits, drugs, alcohol, et cetera, the things that help you, as young males in particular, be able to share. So how can we have
emotionally?
Exactly.
Right.
And so young me really appreciated that, and then saw the power in it, and then also felt the solace in it of like, you're not alone, your condition is not alone, like the way that you feel about the world is not solo to you. And we are not allowed to intellectualize as young men in the late 80s, early 90s in any way, or share any emotion, or be vulnerable in any way. And so that felt very stifling, I think.
I've listened to your interview with Gabor Mate on your podcast, Better. And I know you have deep roots with Gabor, and what a privilege that is for both of you, for the record. But even when you say that, you talk about how the young male was so shut down emotionally, it hurts my heart. I think about generations of boys who were told not to feel. And I don't know how you broke out of that. But, it's a victory in a lifetime to break free from that as a man, or a woman for that matter.
Certainly. And I mean, I walk in a white cis male body, right? So for all of the issues that I faced mentally, externally, I had every privilege in the world. Mm-hmm. Like, I've been able to use that privilege to put me in all the rooms that normally would be impossible to get into. And because I make people comfortable and then very uncomfortable, right? So it's a Trojan horse routine that I've certainly used my whole life. But I think, thank you for the note around Gabor. He's a light walker and speaker, and we were on a panel together for the first time, I think in 2012 or 13. And I tell this story because Gabor was on the panel, and I'm over caffeinated, still, I'm a sober person now, but still drinking. Probably had 4 hours sleep. And I hit the stage, and I'm excited, and I'm going to charge up and talk. And Gabor gets introduced, and he starts to talk. And I can feel my anxiety because he's speaking so slowly and deliberately. I'm like, I'm going to jump out of my own eyeballs on this stage right now. Mm-hmm. And then within about 15 or 20 seconds, I was snake charmed. His energy just had me. And they actually asked me a question afterwards, and I was stunned. And so I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I was like, I'm going to need a moment actually to digest what I heard. Right. And so, like most people who encounter Gabor off the hop, was like, not only are you telling my story, you're telling everybody's story. And to be able to translate trauma in a way that's digestible for everybody who has an addict adjacent to them or internally is not only a superpower, it's everything.
And also to be able to be in that space of really showing up authentically and not talk as fast as you think people want to hear it. I think of him like Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in that way.
Yes.
You know, how, I mean, he was made fun of by so many people. But boy, when you look at what he was doing now, the mission he had in life, and I see a comparison between him and Gabor. And you are on that path. And I know, or I believe that food got you on that path, but I want to know how it started.
Yeah, certainly. So I was raised by incredible women. For the most part, my mom, whose name is tattooed on my neck, who we lost 2 years ago, August.
To
I was
COVID. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I was just thinking about her as I was walking over here because we had, unbeknownst to her, a living wake for her just down here at what was formerly Hopscotch Restaurant. And there's a picture of her and I walking arm in arm. And my mom and my relationship was insanely complicated, as most boys and mothers are. But she saw me, and I was unable to accept what the truth of me was for many years. So it was very challenging. But what galvanized our relationship and my family's relationship as an incredibly dysfunctional family was food. Any good memory I had about family convenings was around food. And my aunt, Diana Creighton, who actually also managed an Airbnb about 5 blocks down the road forever. And one of the first Christmases I ever had where I felt real true joy was with her cooking in the kitchen. I couldn't have been 10 or 11 years old.
Oh, wow.
And she let me be underfoot. She let me mix the gravy. She let me help trim the chicken. She let me do the things, turkey rather. I only do chicken for the food now, but all of those moments were so visceral for me in taste, smell, and then being acknowledged. And then there was a power to it as well. And also just an intrinsic love. So my Aunt Diane would come to our house, whiskey in hand, cigarette in the other, go into the cupboards, and I'd say, there's nothing in there. And she'd be like, watch. And absolute magic would occur to me. And so I was obsessed with how this happens. And at 14 years old at Micmac Mall, I got a job, lied about my age at what became Tony's Pizza and then became another pizzeria, but it was family Lebanese folks who hired me to essentially wash their dishes during the summer at the mall. This is the most exciting proposition to a 14-year-old at Micmac Mall because I was with the pizza guys.
Right.
Like the slice of pizza was the mecca of our summer, right? Like nobody had any money. The arcade was just down around the way. And so by day 3, I'm at them. I'm like, can I be involved in making dough, et cetera? They showed me how to make dough. My whole life changed. And I mean, anybody who's ever learned to bake bread, which I feel like everybody on the planet learned to make sourdough during the pandemic, the moment of like, there's something in the air that makes this happen. Oh my God, there's an entire energetic field we don't understand. Like I, at 14, went, I can make dough for like 22 cents. So I can make pizza for like $1. No wonder this business model works. And I was so enamored with it. And also they would let me take the old slices at the end of the night and give them to my friends.
So it was currency as well.
Oh, 100%. So like my guys would sit and wait till it closed and then we would have free slices, and they were terrible because they were old, but it was still like, it felt like a real privilege and an honor. And so that stuck with me my entire journey. It's essentially still what we do today, except the slices have gotten way better.
So you followed a path in food and found extreme success, but eventually there was a TSN turning point. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the success first.
Sure. Yeah. And so I left here.
Quote unquote success. Sorry.
Certainly. I mean, we can define that too, which is fun, I think, for people, because what the perception of success is and the toxicity of it and the fact of what it's so hollow. But I was going to St. Mary's, air quotes here. And I remember walking into Psych 101 and reading through the textbook, and then there were any introductory questions. And my first question was, is this all the diagnosis? Like, is this all that exists in psychology? And the professor being like, I'm not sure I understand the question. I was like, it feels like it would be more complex than this. Like, it feels like there's a lot more complexity to unravel here. And he was like, I remember the eye roll of, oh, okay, we're going to do this. So psych wasn't for me. Philosophy, oh my God. I felt like an absolute Jim Morrison, Jack Kerouac, Hunter S. Thompson genius in philosophy. I was like, I could eat this for breakfast all day, and I adore it. So that part felt really good to me, but the trappings of traditional study, it just doesn't work. So I left and went to Australia and spent 10 years there, and went to Melbourne and dove into food, front of house, back of house, everywhere I could, breakfast cook, doorman, and worked my way into becoming a DJ.
And okay, but first, what was it about food that you loved, apart from that pizza dough experience and feeling the energetic attachment and so on? What do you think it was that made food the bait that got you to Australia, for instance? Yeah,
I mean, every single interaction that you can have with somebody nourishing them or introducing them to something or cooking them something that they like, the first time you actually cook somebody meat properly, let's say, right? And that first bite and watching that, like that 33 years later doesn't get old for me. My fiance and I will sit and she's like, how do you get the meat right every time? Like, if I can't get the meat right, we have a very, very serious problem. Like the entities have an issue, we have an issue, but her like beautiful engagement with something that we honor so deeply and where did it come from and why did it come from and the entire thing is so critically important. But more importantly, the toxicity of our food system was very apparent to me at a teenage age. Mm-hmm. So processed foods and all of those things and how they made my body feel happened to me early. I knew how bad it was for me. I knew what it did to my mental health, what it did to my sleep patterns, what it did to my health. And by, call it 25, my mother had polycystic kidney disease. I have polycystic kidney disease. I'm stage 3, almost stage 4 renal failure. I'm 49 years old. In a moment, in a heartbeat, I'll be 49. I'm not dialyzing. I was told I'd be dialyzing by 35. And I share all of this to say my medical prescription for myself was food.
Good food.
Well, it's our entire engine. It's everything we do. If we put garbage in, we get garbage out. I mean, it's so simple, and yet we pay for the cure. We don't pay for the preventive.
We couldn't share the great stories that we do here on the Canadian Love Map podcast without the amazing support of Charm Diamond Centers. They are Canada's largest family-owned jeweler, and they're proud to be putting love on the map. The folks at Charm Diamond Centers are thrilled to be a part of your love story. So visit charmdiamondcenters.com or one of your local stores. Love starts here. So what really flipped the switch for you and took you down a path of contribution rather than performance is how I look at it?
Yeah, it was always going to be my answer. And my Aunt Diane, I hearken back to her often. I miss her very, very much. We couldn't walk down a Dartmouth street without her picking up a stray kitten. And God forbid there was a bird with an injured wig. And God forbid there was somebody who needed some help because they were all coming home.
Open heart.
100%. And so it was always going to be. And so a place, as I struggled, and before I opened my first restaurant, I had a really hard time with drugs and alcohol trying to figure out where I was going to be. And I was sleeping on my friend's couch at the time, and I was in bad shape. And I remember one evening, I made a conscious decision that I was either going to make an impact or I wasn't going to be around. And that's when we decided to open the first restaurant. And I mean, when I say gamble, I convinced 3 people in this space, and there's a picture of me standing in this burnt out, essentially old building, being like, this is where we're going to plant our flag, and then being like, okay. But it was an insane proposition. So I found myself at that same intersection of, during that time, I went to Save on Meats all the time, and I ate the burger at the counter, and I just was not in good shape. But I got to know the owner very well. And his name was Al Delorier, rest in peace, and he had shepherded that building since 1957 as a religious man, but also as a community person of food security, unbeknownst to him. So people throughout the downtown east side would come in there and eat and have $1 and slap it on the counter, and he would just take care of people.
It was just happening organically.
It's who he was,
yeah.
Right? It's who we are as Nova Scotians. Mm-hmm. I can just tether it straight back. That didn't exist for me visibly on the West Coast. I hadn't seen it. And so I loved Al, and I felt very comfortable there. And as I was seeing success, he wanted to retire, and he said, hey, I'm not going to sell the building unless somebody takes over this business. And at the time, I was renovating one restaurant and building 2 more. And I was like, who would be crazy enough to do that? And he said, I have some ideas. And so I went back to
I'm looking at you.
He's literally. And I said, Al, I don't have any money to do this. Like, there's no way that I could take on this project. But I already knew. Like, it was in my core. Like, And 2 years prior, I'd stood with my best friend at the time and my ex-wife, and we had looked across at Save-On and said, one day I want to do this project.
Whew.
So I was reminded by both of them
Truth bumps.
that one day was here. And a dear friend of mine and I had far too much to drink the next night. And we were sitting in the back of our gallery at the time. And I said, I got to do this project. And he's like, how much money do you need? And I said, I don't even know. Like, I have no idea how much money I would need. Like, it's falling apart. And it's 4 stories and it's 21,000 square feet. And he's like, well, what if I gave you $250,000 as a loan to start? And to me, that was such astronomical money. I was like, I don't even know how to answer that question. He's like, you have to do this project. And I mean, this man never got any of the credit. His name is Michael Emmett. He's like a saint of saints. I just finally paid him back fully like 2 years ago with a check I was able to present to him. Never pressured us, never once
Mark,
anything.
that's extraordinary.
So he gives me this money, and another gentleman was in the neighborhood, heard about me talking about this project. His name's Brian Smith, who's my partner at Persephone Brewing and dear, dear friend. He's like, I can write the business plan because I know you've never written one. Brian Smith writes this business plan, gives it to Van City with my input, of course, and I have some really good ideas. And I go to New York to do a dinner. He calls me in New York. He's like, I've got some news. I'm like, great, what is it? 90% of my body is like, there's no way Van City's giving us that money. Thank God. Thank God, because then I would have to do the project. And he's like, yeah, we got fully financed. I was like, oh, shit.
You're on a fast-moving train.
And it all became very clear to me. You know, the aperture really tightened. We did all of this media, and then I hunkered down. And in that decision to hunker down after all of that, it was, you know why you're here. You know what you need to do. Go to work. And so that building has fed 5 million people at this point. As of this year, we've employed hundreds and hundreds of folks. And in Upward Mobility Kitchens is one of my entities, and we call it that specifically because we do high barrier employment, physical, mental disability, people coming out of recidivism. And I walked through there the week before I came out here, and I saw one of my employees, his name's Robert. He has a developmental delay and works in prep and in our kitchen and helps out with dish now and time and again. I said, how long have you been here? And he said, 10 and a half years this year.
Whoa.
And I hold on to those numbers, and I looked around the room like, Narj, how long have you been here? And he's like, 8 years this year. I was like, right. This is your home that we co-created. Like, we built this thing together, and you're my family, and we're here. And so, we just tying that all together, knowing the blueprint, we built the archetypes, we shared them with everybody, and everything from food provision to food recovery to employment practices. And we do that when Mayor of Germany comes to visit to the guy in Buffalo who wants to do a social enterprise kitchen. We are the folks that people lean into on that.
So this is a podcast about love. And what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that when someone hits you with fear, if you respond with fear, that is going nowhere good. Whereas if they hit you with fear and you stay in the love energy that you're living in, all of a sudden it changes them, ideally, and changes the dialogue, and meanwhile attracts people to you who are like-minded and like-hearted.
100%. So 3 things to respond to that with. The first one is, I've got love tattooed all over my body. I found it. My partner and I are the greatest challenge and the greatest gift. We're getting married shortly. We've been engaged, and I adore.
Shortly is a very vague term.
Because of the work and where we're going. But we within 3 weeks we're in that discussion. Like we're deeply meant for each other, and the way that she sees me and reflects my gifts to me allows me to move in a way where I feel completely unrestricted to do the things that need to be done, knowing that I have somebody there. So I use that analogously to say that we are in a fast food state of relational status in the way that we are as humans right now, and knowing that love does exist at this deep level, and that it is not a maybe or a nice to have, that it is a worthwhile mission to know what you deserve and work towards it.
Someone who gives you roots and wings.
100%. And that also knowing what's not for you is not for you. It's a very simple thing. And I think we fear loneliness because we are the most disconnected, connected generation that has ever lived. And so having that isolation and fear is one thing. And the secondary part where you said the gravitational force, I was walking with a young cook who's a recovering fine dining cook, we like to say all the time. And that's who ends up to come to work for me, is people who are recovering from Michelin star. I was walking with him today, and he got to listen to a call that I was on with the province, and the food policy for school food will be announced in an hour and 20 minutes from the PM level, and it'll be announced here in Nova Scotia. And so I was on an internal call with them about that and on speaker in my kitchen. And to give it an analogy on why love is so important, 256 schools will need to be fed school lunch in about 9 weeks here. The RFP doesn't finish for another 2 weeks. This is government. This is where we are. It's not a knock. It's a, we need to feed kids. Let's hurry this up, and we'll build the plane as we fly it a little bit. So he says to me, how many schools are we going to do? And I said, if we're successful, we're going to do 7. He said, and how many is there? I said, 256. He said, why are we doing 7? And I said, because we're a bespoke agency for those who are marginalized. And we do a school here that has 68 different allergens and adjustments for 380 kids.
Whoa.
60, and because food is poison. So we meet those, but everybody can't meet those. And because they are recovering Michelin folks, we look at this as a bunch of chits, and we execute the chits and we get it done. And Amanda, who has an allergy to nightshades and gluten and a sensitivity to dairy, is going to eat today. And she's going to eat something that's delicious for her and that makes sense for her, and she gets seen and she gets supported. So I'm walking with him, and he said, wouldn't we be able to scale to do more of that? And I said, I don't think there's enough people to come and do this work with us. And he stopped me dead and said, what are you talking about? He's like, love. People want to be involved in this. They want to love what they do. They want to be in service to this. They are here. You need to know that as we're walking. I barely know this dude. Like, we've spent maybe 45 minutes together at this point, and he is so directly echoing what I believe from a space in a heart center of love and integrity that I am so moved by it. I'm like, okay, I guess we're doing 256 schools. It's just going to take us a couple of years. Like, we'll figure it out. We're not. But what does that look like? And love is the centering design point of all of it. I know that's what's going to make it work.
Well, and to go further into that example, you take that one child who has the allergens that are wreaking havoc on her diet probably, and you give her something specifically made for her. That's love in action. That is nurturing. That is her being seen and made to feel like she matters. It's so much more than food.
It's everything in that part of being seen and being cared for. So when I say her, I am literally speaking to 14-year-old me. I'm speaking to 12-year-old you. I'm speaking to both of you right now too. We are all that person in some way, shape, or form in our relationship to food. I hate the person that's apologetic at the table when we go to eat and says, I can't do peanuts and chili. You know who doesn't care? The server cares, the chef cares, and I have to explain that to people over and over again. I'm like, you are not the problem, you're the solution. Please advocate for yourself. Please say what you need. You're not disrupting me or anybody else. But we are in a system that we now know these 256 schools are the organizations that are able to do this level of production going to be able to stand in that heat and do those adjustments? They're not. And we know that. And so for us, we're like looking at where the most culturally rich and diverse, where the people who are already marginalized the most, who doesn't have support from community. Rural areas have a much deeper community than we do here in the city, in the center districts. So that's where we're going to show up first, is to say, hey, we see you. We've got you. These things are all done with love at the center of the design. And the last thing that you said about meeting somebody who has fear with love, I will move directly into empathy, into deep listening. When we were doing the Oprah show, there was posters made for the downtown east side of me and Oprah and like stacks of money. And it's like, why are Oprah and Mark Brand gentrifying the downtown east side? And I was like, that is an excellent question. I'm going to that. And my team was like, you're absolutely not going to that. And it was at the Carnegie Center in Vancouver, famous place of advocacy. And there was 3 or 4 people who were bomb throwers, as I'd like to describe them. They love to throw bombs at issues, but never have discourse. Sure. And I walked in and sat down. And they were like, you can't be here. I was like, I absolutely can. You advertised I would be here. Here I am. They were like, fine, sit in it. And I got attacked for about 2.5 hours. And I don't mean like lightly. I mean, you are scum. You are the worst. And I was watching them coach people in the corner on what to say. These people don't know me. They'd never seen me before in their lives, and then been brought up to a mic. And I stood up at one point and was like, am I allowed to speak? And they said, sit the fuck down. I sat and I just literally weathered the whole thing till they ran out of breath. As I was leaving, 4 Indigenous leaders surrounded me and were like, can we please speak? I was like, absolutely. And they're like, we're going to come down and see you. So I went back down to my diner, went upstairs to my office, poured like 6 fingers of whiskey and drank all of it immediately and was like, I don't know what to do with that. And the diner rang upstairs and they said, there's a gentleman who really wants to speak to you. And he was from the Squamish Band. And I came downstairs and he said, what you did today meant a lot to us. And I said, I'm not sure what I did. And I'm not sure why I was there. And I'm not sure. He's like, it'll all become clear. Was sort of, I'm paraphrasing at this point, but it'll all become clear. My relationship with that neighborhood was I would stand in it. I would have the conversations. And if people wanted to throw bombs, they would come in and be like, I'm so easy to find. If you want to say something, you can find me at 43 West Hastings Street or at number 1 West Cordova. Like, come talk to me about it. And that was what I didn't know at the time was a radical act of love. I was like, I see you. I see your anger. I see your vitriol. I know this isn't about me, but it is right now. And some of this is well-deserved. So let me sit in it. And that was sort of a turning point, I guess, if you will, for what I knew had to be done and what was important.
When I interviewed Oprah on her set in Chicago in 1995, one of the questions I asked her was about her wealth. And I said, I knew she came from very meager means and a very tough childhood. And I said, do you ever feel uncomfortable or guilty about your wealth? And she said, let me think about that. And then she ended up saying, hell no, Nance. I feel like if you've earned it, you've honestly earned it, why should you feel guilty about it? However, I do believe that from those to whom much is given, much is expected.
Absolutely.
And that was, as I didn't know at the time, a biblical reference, but it became my whole theory around we need to step out of performance in our lives and step into contribution. What does the word contribution mean to you now?
Oh, I think, and I hope this really soothes anybody listening in a permissive way. That's not mine to give, it's ours collectively to give, which is you're doing your best. And I mean that so the amount of guilt that people come to me with and that ask me to carry briefly as well of I don't do enough. And I'll be like, what do you do? And the resume of things that people do in their private lives for us as communities is so heartbreakingly astounding, and that they think it's not enough. And so, just sitting with us at the library, I've got my friend Chef Andy Hay, and he came and cooked this dinner with me.
East Coast Andy.
East Coast is my guy.
He's awesome.
He cooked this dinner with me for 40 people, a private dinner 2 weeks ago, and he volunteers in our kitchen every couple of weeks. I was with Osa and I was talking about Andy, and she said, oh yeah, Andy came and judged this thing for masterclass with the kids and did some of this. And I'm like, yeah, Andy also volunteers at the Stop a little bit. And he's raising these kids, and his wife had a rough time. And you start to unravel people's humanity versus their resume, and you think about how beautiful people are. And so when folks come to me, they're like, my skill set's not valuable, is what I hear often. And I can give that an even better story. For many years, folks would come to me and say, Chef, I really want to cook with you and I want to help. And I would say, do you know how to cook? And say, no. I'm like, how is that helpful to me? And, I mean this tongue in cheek, but how is that helpful to me? You're going to come and cut yourself, burn yourself. I also employ people. You want to put them out of work, and get them laughing a little bit and make it a little more lighthearted and say, what do you do? Well, I'm a UX designer, but that's probably not that helpful. I'm like, oh, have you seen impact websites? Do you want to here's a person you could work with. And identifying what your skill set is, what you love doing and what you excel at doing, and then applying that in a small, medium, or large way is the medicine. And versus saying, I think people need sandwiches. Trust me, they don't. We make a lot of sandwiches. Everybody makes a lot of sandwiches. People don't need sandwiches. What people might need is an opportunity employment. And would you be willing to employ somebody that has a physical or mental disability within your business and change one life? And when I say if you change one life, if we say that 20 to 30% of the Canadian population is living in poverty or abject poverty or below the line or struggling really hard, if each of us took on somebody, there wouldn't be enough to go around. So do I need to employ 500 people? Well, government would love me to do that. and other people would love, because all we understand is scale and greed. Like we don't understand anything. Those are only metrics that we speak in any impact way, right? So if Mark Brand builds 25 kitchens, the problem is solved. Incorrect. Poverty is the problem. So if poverty continues to increase, I could build 500 kitchens. It's not going to matter.
Band-aids.
At all. Yeah. What we have to do is address the problem. In the interim, where we find, I want to say solace, is we work on multiple levels. Triage is one of them. So we meet people where they are on the street front and feed them every day. We meet people in SROs or single room occupancy hotels or transitional housing, and we feed them every day. We meet kids in breakfast programs and feed them chef-led food every day. That's triage work. And not maybe, and I'm not overstating, like this is people who are starving. So if we're doing that, what's the second level up? And the second level up is employing folks, giving them a living wage, wrapping them in benefits that make sense for them, including extended mental health, showing community members how powerful they are in serving down and up. And then the third
giving
part,
them meaning in that, yeah.
And them giving us meaning back. And so the third part of that is working with government and spending lots of time. I believe in politicians who I believe in, and I sit on all sides of the fence and everywhere else. And that's the third part of our job, is to be able to be in the rooms, be calm, collected, and loving enough to influence policy in a way that matters. We're about to have a universal school lunch program in the province of Nova Scotia that's paid for. That is a gigantic thing.
Amazing.
It's not a small thing, and we may not like the PM and we may not like the announcements, but
it's profound.
It's so big. And I still I've got goosebumps sitting here with you. I haven't wrapped my head around. I had dinner with Minister Suds last night, and I got verklempt around it. Do I believe in everybody's politics? No, but I was like, God, do you know what's going to happen? And we got to help, and we're going to get to do it. And 14-year-old me is so excited he doesn't have to figure out a Happy Meal.
Yes.
That there's going to be something made. And so I walked in with Osa today into our kitchen, and Zach, one of our chefs, is peeling carrots. Scratched the bottom, perfectly French peeled. And she's like, what are you making? And he said, I'm getting the carrots ready for chicken teriyaki. And there was just this profound moment of, this is what we do. The carrots didn't come in a shredded bag to be assembled with a fried thing that was assembled that doesn't have anything good in it left. We get to do that and set a precedent and set a bar that's extremely high for everybody else to then, it's proof. So the more proof that we can impact, that's what matters.
So I read something on your social media, which is, going strong. And I love that you're able to get the word out. There's a lot of bad things about social media, certainly. But with a voice like yours, it can be so powerful. How do you stay anchored in your positivity and in your joy?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I wanted to rattle something off for you really quickly, and I try to as much as I can. And then some days I just don't. I'm just not. And that's okay.
It's a practice.
And it's also okay to be deeply overwhelmed and sad by the existential crises that are in front of us. And so one foot in front of the other on those days, and being able to go into community and spend time with my cooks, with my partner, and get into nature. And I know that that's a deep privilege for me to be able to say I can go walk in one of these ancient forests and take a minute. That's how I reconnect the fact that we're all part of this mycelial network, that when we go back to the dirt, we're from it. I've got a dear friend, Michelle Thaler, and she's a NASA genius, literally. And she gave a keynote once, since how I met her. And she said, we're all made of stardust. And I was like, that's a beautiful sentiment. Didn't David Bowie say that? And she was like, no, literally, Mark, we're all made of stardust. And then she broke down the science for me. I was like, I got to stop taking myself so seriously.
Mm-hmm. That's the gift.
Right. And so and I had this conversation again this morning, we're running towards a burning planet, right? We're running towards it, and we are complacent in all of it. And that's what's happening. Is there hope for change? Absolutely. I'm in topsoil conversations every other day. We're in all of these conversations, we're in it, and we're talking about, we're going to fight hard. But if we do reach a point, we are going to go back, we are going to come up, and things are going to be what they're going to be. So I think understanding that we have this one beautiful moment and this one beautiful life to share our gifts and be loving and caring and kind with each other, that's the goal. And one bad day does not lead to 10, that's for sure.
Well, it's good to know you're human. And I say that jokingly, but also very seriously, because I think when people hear a voice like yours with your level of enthusiasm and passion and your drive, and they see what you're doing in the world, they think that's someone else. That's something else. That's not something I could ever be. And you're a different race. You're a different, you're an alien from outer space or something. And when you say something as simple as it's a practice for me to stay in my joy and out of despair, I think that's what connects us. That's the vulnerability that as humans, Gabor Mate would say, that's where we really allow ourselves to feel belonging to each other.
Certainly.
When we are authentic with each other. And I'll read one last quote before I let you go. And this is from social media.
Sure.
And I loved your podcast with Jan Arden, by the way.
Thank you.
You've interviewed each other, but you talked about one particular person who was spewing shit on your social media.
Sure.
But I found Stevie Love 1234 who said, "Thank you, Mark, for your Iron Man heart and how you put it to work for others." And I couldn't say it any better than that. So I thought I'd bring Stevie Love 1234 into the end of the conversation. My way of saying it is thank you for how you're showing up in the world.
I appreciate you, and I really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and the space to just share all of the things that are important to us. And I think the last thing I will say to you is how I also stay in practice is we are a product directly of what we ingest. So being very, very mindful of what we put in our mouth, what we put in our eyes, what we put in our ears, and who we allow close to us. That allows me to stay in joy, and this has been one of those moments. So thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Canadian Love Map. This podcast is presented and made possible by Charm Diamond Centers. It's hosted by me, Nancy Regan, and is produced and distributed by Podstarter. We love sharing love stories of all kinds, and that could include yours. So do you or someone you know have an uplifting tale to tell? Reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram using @CanadianLoveMap or email producer@podstarter.io. We'll be back next week with another love story to add to the map.